I will always remember the heartfelt conversation I had with my father when I announced my engagement. He pulled me aside, concern etched on his face, and asked if I was truly sure about marrying Stephen. While he acknowledged my love for him, he expressed doubts about whether Stephen was truly the right match for me. Confused, I pressed for an explanation. My father shared that although Stephen was kind and respectful, he sensed something unsettling about him and his mother, a feeling he couldn't quite articulate, attributing it to a father's intuition. Despite my protests, my father revealed his observations. Stephen often boasted about my wealth to his friends, presenting me more as a trophy than a partner. He worried that Stephen's affection was more about my money than about love. At that moment, I dismissed my father's concerns, blinded by my emotions and a desperate need to cling to a relationship that felt like it could fill the void left by my mother's death 3 years earlier and my father's declining health. My father had built his fortune through smart investments and hard work, providing a comfortable life for us, while I was also making a decent living from my job. In contrast, Stephen and his mother, Megan, came from a more modest background and frequently complained about their lack of luxury. Even after moving into my house post-marriage, they remained dissatisfied, always yearning for a more extravagant lifestyle. Looking back, I see that my father may have perceived things I was unable to see at the time. I was a young woman in love, desperate to hold on to something that offered me a reason to keep going amid my grief and loneliness. While Stephen and Megan became my new family, they were not the refuge I had hoped they would be. I vividly recall a moment when Stephen and Megan criticized my small townhouse in comparison to my father's mansion. "It's such a shame," they lamented, "that with your dad living in such a grand place, you ended up with this tiny house." I tried to explain that despite my father's wealth, I was merely an office worker with a modest income, and buying this house was only possible with my dad's assistance for the down payment. Megan, ever materialistic, insinuated that my father should have provided me with a better place, implying that my mother must have left something for me when she passed away unexpectedly without a will. I attempted to clarify that whatever my mother had left was rightfully my father's, and I was content with what I had. I didn't feel entitled to more. Stephen then audaciously suggested that my father should swap houses with us since he lived alone and didn't need all that space, to which Megan eagerly agreed. I was horrified and firmly refused, emphasizing that the house was my father's, and he deserved to live there comfortably for the rest of his life. Their reaction was cold and calculating, pointing out that since my father was ill, they could wait a few years, and everything would eventually be mine. Their blatant anticipation of my inheritance was deeply unsettling, especially as they continually suggested I ask my father for more money. Despite us not being in financial distress, they were clearly fixated on a millionaire lifestyle without the means to support it. The true crisis hit after my father succumbed to cancer. My heart shattered. Yet Stephen and Megan offered me little support, their primary concern being when they could hear about the will. They even refused to attend my father's funeral, claiming he meant nothing to them, which left me devastated and furious. As I reflected on those times, my father's earlier warnings replayed in my mind, igniting doubts about Stephen and Megan's true motives. Their behavior became increasingly hard to ignore, and I began to seriously question their intentions in our relationship. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their primary interest lay in my inheritance. Their fixation was glaring during the will reading. Outraged at being excluded, Stephen demanded, "Why can't we be there for the reading of the will? He was my father-in-law." Megan chimed in, insisting it was ridiculous that they, as family, were not present to learn what Lawrence had left behind, especially since her son should have had a claim. The lawyer's response was blunt, "Your son isn't mentioned in the will, Megan, so he cannot attend the reading." I confronted them about their obsession with the inheritance, especially given their absence from the funeral. It felt as though my father was only considered family when money was involved. Their behavior escalated after the will reading. When I returned home, they bombarded me with questions. Even in my grief, they offered no comfort or sympathy, only inquiries about the details of the inheritance. "So, how much did you inherit from your parents? They must have left you a fortune, right?" Megan asked eagerly. To quell their speculation, I replied, "Actually, I didn't receive anything. My parents' wealth wasn't left to me." Their stunned reaction spoke volumes. "You got nothing? But your parents were wealthy. They must have left you something. Are you sure you're not hiding it from us?" Stephen accused. I reassured them, "There's no money. You're welcome to check my bank statements, but you won't find any changes." As for the rest of their assets, they decided to donate whatever was left to charity. Their frustration was palpable, and Megan quickly suggested that I contest the will. "That's absurd. You need to fight for what's rightfully yours." But I stood my ground. "There's nothing to contest. My parents chose to leave their remaining assets to charity. I respect their decision." Stephen and Megan's outrage at my indifference to a fortune that no longer existed baffled me, but it only deepened my suspicions about their true intentions. I teetered on the brink of revealing everything, but a nagging doubt held me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that Stephen and Megan were plotting something behind my back as they continued to press for details about the inheritance. I remained resolute, firmly repeating that I hadn't received any money, even offering to show them my bank account to prove it. Days turned into weeks, and soon a month had passed. Stephen's demeanor shifted dramatically. He grew distant and agitated, often checking my bank account and hounding me about the inheritance. It became increasingly clear to me what his true motivations were. Finally, fed up with the situation, I decided to confront it directly. I laid my bank statements before them, demonstrating that no inheritance had come my way. See? I wasn't lying. There's no secret fortune, I asserted, hoping this would put the matter to rest. However, their reaction was explosive. Stephen erupted. All those years wasted, so your parents weren't as wealthy as we thought, and you didn't even get a dime. This is unbelievable. His disappointment hit me hard, but then he said something that shattered me. I stayed in this marriage for nothing. I married you for nothing. It was all a waste. My heart sank. What do you mean, Stephen? Why would you say that? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Megan scoffed. Who would marry you without thinking about the money? My son married you under the impression we could count on your inheritance. Now we find out you have nothing. I can't believe I wasted 6 years on a useless girl like you. Stephen could have done so much better. Their cold words confirmed my worst fears. It was painfully clear that Stephen had married me for my potential wealth. My parents had been right about him and his mother. They were nothing but gold diggers. As if that weren't enough, Megan turned to Stephen with a calculating gaze. What's done is done, Stephen. But now it's time for you to leave her. There's no reason to stay anymore. You'll have the opportunity to find a new rich wife next time, one who actually has money. Her words cut like a knife. Are you kidding me, Megan? You're pushing Stephen to divorce me over money? I asked, my voice trembling. Stephen's silence was deafening. In that moment, everything fell into place. The facade had shattered, exposing the harsh reality of their intentions. Heartbroken, I realized I had to muster the strength to move on from this betrayal. Stephen's next words were chillingly pragmatic. I married you because I thought it would secure a comfortable life for me and my mom. We've always struggled. I didn't go to college and have no real means to earn much. I thought marrying you would change that, assuming your parents would leave you a substantial inheritance that you would share with us. His blunt confession that he had feigned love for financial security stunned me. He continued, it was the only way I thought I could give my mom the life she deserved. But now, seeing that there's no inheritance, it seems my efforts were pointless. Mom was right. I needed to look ahead and keep searching for clarity. Stephen's words, delivered with such nonchalance, sent shockwaves through me as he and Megan vented their frustration. I felt myself tuning them out, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their deceit. Their utter lack of empathy, coupled with Stephen's sudden shift in demeanor, was both upsetting and infuriating. I was furious, teetering on the edge of a scream, but I forced myself to respond calmly. Fine, Stephen, if you want a divorce, then that's what you'll get. I've never denied your requests. Consider this my final favor. Megan, always the provocateur, chimed in. Don't think this means you can take alimony from my son. We'll fight you tooth and nail to make sure you see not a cent. I replied firmly, you're right. I don't have much money at the moment, so here's my proposal, a mutual divorce with no division of assets or alimony. You don't have much, and neither do I. If you forgo alimony, I'll agree to sign and not claim anything further from you. We began to discuss the terms of our divorce with a clinical detachment. Devoid of any emotional connection, it felt purely transactional, a stark reflection of how far our relationship had deteriorated. As we negotiated, I could sense that both Megan and Stephen were pleased by my lack of drama in the process. Perhaps they were surprised by my composure, unaware that I was privately unraveling with each passing day. Tears streamed down my face on the drive to work, and I often spent hours crying alone in my car before and after my shifts. Neither Stephen nor Megan seemed to notice my red-rimmed eyes or question the lengthening of my daily routine. Once it became clear to Megan that there was no inheritance waiting for me, she all but ignored my existence, further solidifying my resolve to expedite the divorce. I arranged for Stephen and Megan to move into a nearby rental apartment. They settled in quickly, and as the divorce proceedings progressed, Stephen remained true to his word, not claiming any part of my house. In return, I did not seek alimony from him. It was a straightforward exchange. On the day our divorce was finalized, I decided to take one final step. I visited their rental to return my wedding and engagement rings. Standing at their doorstep, I said, I just want to return these. This marriage brought nothing but distress into my life, and I'd rather not keep any reminders of it. Megan scoffed, seizing the opportunity to taunt me. Are you sure? You might need the money. It's amusing how you once looked down on our poverty, and now look at your situation. My son is being generous by letting you keep the rings. You might need to sell them when your job falls through. Her words stung, but I responded with a laugh. clearly confusing both her and Stephen. Why would I need to sell the rings for money? Megan, you don't need to feel embarrassed for me. We both know my parents left me nothing. They lost it all to poor choices, leaving their daughter with nothing. Or so you think. My laughter in the face of their cruelty unsettled them. I caught a glimpse of annoyance on Stephen's face, perhaps embarrassed by his mother's bluntness. As I turned to leave, their bewildered expressions showed they still hadn't grasped the full extent of my independence and resilience. I walked away, feeling liberated from their toxicity and ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. Stephen's confusion over my laughter was palpable, while Megan, clearly annoyed, demanded, "Why the hell are you laughing? Did I say something funny?" Her disbelief only fueled my amusement. "It's genuinely hilarious how you think I'm destitute, Megan, and even more amusing that you believe my parents squandered their entire fortune." Megan snapped back, firmly convinced of her narrative. "Of course you're destitute. Your parents didn't leave you a penny. They ruined your life by not leaving you an inheritance." I couldn't help but smirk at her misunderstanding. "I never said I didn't receive an inheritance, Megan. I just told you that I didn't get any money. In fact, my parents left me quite the inheritance." Confusion clouded her face. "What the hell does that mean? You have an inheritance?" I nodded, savoring the moment. "My parents saw right through you and Stephen as the gold diggers you are, so they included a secret clause in their will. They left me no money, but I inherited this entire neighborhood." Megan's shock was palpable. "You own this neighborhood? How is that possible? We would have known about your inheritance. We even signed our lease with an estate manager who didn't mention the owner's name." "My parents wanted me to wait a year before claiming my inheritance," I continued. "They wanted me to test you and see if you were with me for money or love. You failed that test, and now you won't receive anything from me." The estate manager was appointed by my parents to manage the property until I could claim it. They were very clever, you know. "That's impossible. I don't believe a word you're saying. You're just embarrassed because you have no money," Megan retorted, disbelief etched across her features. Stephen interjected, skepticism lacing his tone. "Oh really? Is that what you believe happened?" His words dripped with mockery, but I could sense a flicker of doubt beneath the surface. "Well, why don't we just call the landlord and find out for sure?" "Go ahead," I replied, fully confident in the outcome. With a mix of defiance and desperation, Megan and Stephen called their landlord, who also happened to be the estate manager. As they listened to the confirmation of my story, their expressions shifted from arrogance to shock. After they hung up, their faces betrayed a tumult of anger and panic. "You lied to us," Megan accused, her voice quivering with disbelief. "You tricked us into thinking you had nothing." Standing before them, I felt a strange blend of vindication and sorrow. Their obsession with wealth had blinded them to the importance of authentic relationships, and now they were facing the repercussions of their greed and deception. Stephen and Megan stood speechless, grappling with the reality that I now owned the entire housing community. "You've kept all this wealth to yourself. You tricked Stephen into divorcing you and ensured he wouldn't get anything." Megan's voice was laced with desperation and betrayal. I couldn't help but laugh at their attempt to flip the narrative. "It's quite ironic for you to call me the trickster," I replied, relishing the absurdity of the situation. "Stephen, you married me under false pretenses, claiming love where there was none, and Megan, you coached him into this mess, pushing for the divorce, thinking you'd escape unscathed. If anyone is the scammer here, it's you two." The truth was simple. They had asked about my financial situation regarding the inheritance, and I had answered honestly. This was all a big misunderstanding, wasn't it? But what's done is done. Funny how you suddenly want to rekindle things now that you know about my inheritance. And Stephen, aren't you already trying to charm another wealthy woman? Don't worry, I'll make sure she knows exactly who you are. As the gravity of their predicament sank in, Stephen and Megan began to plead. Stephen even had the audacity to ask me not to interfere with his new relationship if I wasn't willing to give him another chance. My response was blunt: get lost. I informed them that once the property transfer was finalized, they would be evicted. In the following weeks, they repeatedly showed up at my doorstep, begging for forgiveness. Their desperation was palpable, especially since they already had an eviction on their record, making it hard to find a new place. The only reason they remained on my property was that I had instructed the estate manager to allow it temporarily. Taking decisive action, I reached out to Stephen's new love interest and revealed everything. She was horrified by their actions and ended things with him immediately, even sharing their text exchanges with me as proof of the breakup. Afterward, when Stephen and Megan resorted to verbal attacks against me, I had no choice but to call the police. Their behavior had crossed all boundaries of decency, solidifying my decision to distance myself from them as not just correct but essential. Once the inheritance officially transferred into my name, I promptly evicted Stephen and Megan from the property. They were visibly shocked that I followed through with my threat. Despite their initial disbelief, they attempted to return to my home, prompting me to call the police. The officers issued them a stern warning, and I proceeded to file for a restraining order to ensure their distance. News of our altercation quickly spread throughout the town, and soon everyone was aware of their deceitful behavior. As a result, they found themselves socially ostracized, forcing them to leave the city in search of a fresh start. Meanwhile, I reveled in my newfound financial independence, liberated from the clutches of gold-digging leeches. Now, I was free to enjoy my life and the wealth my parents had wisely left me, ensuring it would benefit someone who truly appreciated their legacy.